What a horrible day. The weather, tea cake is shouting. The weather is disgusting. I don't know what I've got in my glasses. Oh, animals. Anyway, it's such disgusting weather that I'm going to take cuttings. I'm doing indoor jobs. Tomorrow, I'm cutting a wedding, and I'll make a film about cutting a wedding in sort of 2/3 of the way through September in the pouring rain. Oh, yes. This is why my season finishes at the end of September, because sometimes you get long, slow autumns and it's glorious and you think, I could have taken so many more bookings, I'm crazy. Sometimes we have weather like this, and I'm very glad that my season is 10 days away from finishing. So, 20th of September, time to take some cuttings of tender people who might otherwise suffer from the winter weather and be lost. I've already taken some cuttings this summer. This is the Salvia Hadspun I took in July because we had some stormy weather then, and they've rooted up beautifully. So I've potted these on. In fact, I had so many, I've given some of them away. But I'm going to pot these on today, and I'll show you how I do that. And here is some nice material from which I'm going to take some cuttings. So I thought you might like to see how to do it, and then you too could go outside to your precious pelargoniums or your sumptuous salvias and have a rave up, taking a few cuttings so that next year you'll have more plants if you don't lose the ones you've got this winter. And if you lose what's outside in pots this winter, you will have more to replace them with next spring. I always take cuttings in the late summer, early autumn, so that I don't lose my stock. Anyway, let's get on. I can't make cuttings unless I've got some compost and some pots. So that's next on my list. And if you're new to the channel, you're very welcome. Please do subscribe, press the bell icon, and we'll tell you when we've got more clips coming up. And if any of the tips and tricks we give you along the way are useful, you can always buy me a coffee, or better still, join my club, where over 300 other people are making a community of people growing flowers to save the world one flower at a time. Anyway, have a look at the blurb. Is for club membership, and coffee buying is in the blurb for all my clips. So have a look there, and hopefully I'll see you somewhere. Anyway, let's get on. Now, you'll spot, I put all the material, I went out and I cut in the pouring rain a lot of various bits and pieces that I'm going to take cuttings from. And I have, in the short term, put them in a vase. Don't they look great? Actually, that's quite a kind of random... That's living proof that actually you can go to the garden, cut some random bits and shove them in the vase, and they look fabulous. Especially in this gloomy light. Quite dramatic. It's so dramatic. Look, I've even put an orange scarf on to cheer myself up because the light was so terrible. And I'm very happy that I've got some of this penstemon garnet to cheer up. It's one of those flowers that when it first flowers in July, the flowers look really, the colour looks really flat because the light is very high on it. And you think, oh, I don't know if I like that. Not sure at all. But towards the end of the summer and into the autumn, this glowing red looks so great with fading foliage and a greyer light that I wouldn't be without it. And the reason I've cut a bit of this is because I used to have a patch about 2 meters by 1 meter of garnet penstemon. It was absolutely fantastic. And every year I used to be able to cut 100 stems at a time from it. And then 10 days later, cut another 100 stems. It was really very useful. And of course, last winter, 2022-23, here in the southwest of England, we had very, very wet, and then overnight, very, very cold. And then a few more times, very, very wet. We're very wet down here. And then overnight, very, very cold. And so I lost most of it, except for this one plant survived. And because I'm so notoriously mean with money, and also I'm building a new studio up the field, so I'm also feeling the pinch rather on account of I'm spending too much. I haven't replaced it, but I'm going to take cuttings this winter, hopefully they'll survive the winter in the greenhouse, and in the spring I'll have some nice, good-sized, small plants to plant out. Probably April, May time. All of this material, if I take cuttings now, I won't think about planting them out until well into the spring next year. I want the ground to be nice and warm. I want them to be able to romp away. Not all of them are tender. You know, I've cut some rosemary. I'm going to take rosemary cuttings. That's not tender. But there's nothing like a little cutting to like a bit of mollycoddling. So I will look after them over the winter, and they'll be planted out mid to late spring next year. The other thing to think about when you're taking cuttings is do bear in mind how much space you've got. It can be a slightly addictive activity. Yes, as with all things gardening. And so I have filled 2 trays with these pots. I'm going to fill the pots up. I may allow myself to do 1 more tray, and that's going to be enough. If I can't take all my cuttings into that space, I'm not taking them. Because if you can imagine, each of these pots is going to take 4 cuttings. So that's 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 64 plants, I hope. And with my ballpark planting out of about 20 centimetres, that's going to be 2 running meters of metre wide bed with this. And probably actually a bit more. But so it's really important. It's really worth thinking about how much space you've got. And of course, this lovely red salvia actually will never go in a bed up the field. It lives in a pot around my back door. Hello, beautiful. Again, another great red. And I don't know what it's called, sorry. But it's a really good little red salvia. So look up really good little red salvia and see if you can find something. And look, lips for scale. But it's important, whatever planting setup you're doing, that you consider how much space you're going to have in the spring and not overdo it. You know, if you think about going to the garden centre, how many plants do you buy at a time to plant out? Probably 6, 3. So if you're taking 64 cuttings and you're going to have 64 plants, because hopefully they will take, that's a lot of planting out to do and a lot of space necessary. So do think twice before you just take millions of cuttings, or think now, I know I'm going to have a plant sale in aid of some local charity, and I can take as many cuttings as I like and they can all be for the plant sale. Don't tempt me. Oh my goodness, we could do a plant sale. We haven't done a plant sale for years. I used to do plant sales every year for the village hall. This village, we built a new village hall, and we had to re-roof a 12th century church. So the village hall cost, I can't remember how many hundreds of thousands, but for about 10 years we did plant sales for the village hall and the church. And we haven't done one for a year or 2. Oh my goodness. Don't put ideas in my head. Right, come on, let's take some cuttings. This is how I do it. I can't turn this thing off. I'm turning this off so I can fill the pot up. By the way, people often ask me where my mugs come from. I love my mugs. These are created by a designer called Rachel Pedder-Smith, and she does these lovely, lovely botanical designs on all kinds of things like scarves and hats and fabrics and mugs and tea towels. Anyway, I love her mugs. This is not an advert. I just tell you, I love her mugs. I love my Merry People boots. Not an advert. I love my Merry People boots. Not much of an ad person, me. Anyway, enough of this chat. I'm going to fill these pots. So I am filling my pots with Silver Grove Peat-Free compost. Also not an ad. They do not pay me for this. There are lots of different kinds of peat-free compost. One must use peat-free compost because it is not... just because gardeners, in the great scheme of things, don't use vast amounts of peat, doesn't mean that the little amount of peat we use is okay. Peat bogs are vast carbon sinks. And so it is not our job as gardeners to start digging up carbon sinks created over thousands of years. It is our job as gardeners to tread lightly upon the land and use as few resources as we can in order to create our gardens. I'll just riff about peat-free compost for a minute. So peat-free compost, as with all other kinds of compost, is not always perfect. Neither is any kind of compost that you buy made commercially. Sometimes there are bits of twig or branch that have got through the system. Sometimes it's a bit lumpy. Sometimes, if you buy it from the garden centre, it's been sitting there for a while and is a bit stinky. When you open the bag, might be a bit anaerobic. But peat-free is sustainable. And so therefore, we should use it. I use Silvergrow, and I apologise if you're anywhere else in the world, but Silvergrow is a UK company, and it's made by Melcourt, and most of the time it's a very nice mix. Sometimes it's not brilliant, but most of the time it's fine. And I have ways to make the compost work better for me. And one of those ways is I always water from underneath, because with peat-free compost, sometimes you get a sort of crusty surface on your pots of compost, particularly if you're watering from above. So I always water from below. Look, bit of twig. Farewell, the twig. So I always water from below, and because it has a very nice spongy nature, peat-free compost will absorb the water nicely from below like a sponge. And so even if the surface of your compost looks a bit dry, it's always worth lifting a pot to see if it feels light. And then, and only then, should you water. If you're taking cuttings to overwinter in a greenhouse or somewhere cool, you do not want to overwater. The reason people lose cuttings is they rot because they've been massively overwatered. And what people do is they look at the surface of their compost and they think, oh, that looks a bit dry, and they slosh a bit of water on the top. When you slosh a bit of water on the top, the water may have come from the water butt. There may be pathogens in it, there may not. You slosh the water on the top, and if it's a cool grey day like today, and the light levels are low, it's not sunny enough to dry the water off the plant during the day. And so rot can set in. And so that's one of the reasons I don't water from above in the winter. I water from below. So these trays that my cuttings are in have no holes in, but I can fill them with water, and the compost will absorb the water from underneath. The cuttings will be nicely held in by the spongy compost, and hopefully they will set nice roots, and we will all live happily ever after. Right, next bit. Water between the pots. Fill the trays up with water. I'm not watering the compost, I'm watering the tray underneath. Filling that up with water so that the pots can slowly absorb the water, and the compost will absorb as much as it can and no more. And I will then not water much during the winter. I will just lift up the pots from time to time. And if we've had a sunny week, I might find they're a bit dry, in which case I might water from underneath. But I won't just water for the sake of watering, because I can't be bothered not to. Now I'm going to start with this rosemary. This is a variety called Mrs. Jessop's Upright, which gives you lovely tall stems. And that's why I've got it, because I like long tall stems for particularly funeral work. And the way I'm going to take these cuttings is the following way. Here is the stem. Okay, I just cut a stem. And you see it's got all these nice shoots coming out from the side. These are going to make very nice cuttings. I'm not going to make a cutting of the leading shoot here. I'm going to use these side shoots. And this is one way of taking cuttings. It's very, very simple. I'm going to pull, not cut, the side shoot. And I'm going to try and pull it. I want a tiny little bit of, I want the join. So think about this, anthropomorphize all activities with gardening, and it makes it much, much easier. You can imagine that where the plant is shooting a side shoot, there's a lot of activity going on there. And so there's a lot of energy there. And that energy I'm going to take away from the stem and I'm going to transfer it to making roots. This side shoot is attached to the stem as if it's attached to the ground. So pulling it off, I'm going to really, look, I've got a little bit of the stem there. That's great. I'm going to take off most of the leaves and I'm going to pinch out. My fingers are too blunt for actual pinching, so this is called pinching, but actually I'm using it with snips. I'm going to snip out the growing tip. What I'm doing is I'm leaving enough green leaf to photosynthesize. Do you remember that from your biology O-level? Photosynthesis is when the plant reacts with sunlight to make energy and grow. So it must have some green, but not an enormous amount. It's got where it was attached to the original stem. And I am going to dip it, because I've got some, into some hormone rooting powder. This is organic hormone rooting powder. Awful thing is, I'm told that it counts as a pesticide, but it says it's organic. Oh, I don't know. Swings and roundabouts. I'd be interested to see what any of you think. Anyway, I know that this will really help it root. And I'm going to stick my, well, you want to be able to see this, stick my finger in the pot, and I'm going to pop my cutting right into the corner and tamp. You can see it's dripping water already, and tamp the compost down around it. And what will happen now, I hope, is that the cutting will start to grow roots slowly down towards the water source. And in a few weeks' time, I'll know it's done it, because I'll see roots coming out of the bottom. Not in a few weeks. I'll look probably in February. It's mid-September now, but that should do quite nicely. It's got enough leaf to photosynthesize. It's got a little bit of stem in there. It's got a tiny bit of hormone rooting powder. Bingo. Good quality compost. So I'm going to do a few more, but you don't need to watch me do them all. I'll show you when I've done a few more, and then I might do another. I'll show you some other things. Sorry, one more thing. You pinch out the top. I'm snipping off the top because I don't want it to put the energy into growing up. I want it to put the cutting to put energy into growing down. I want the roots to go down, not the growing to go up. Right, now I'm going to do the same with my beloved, I love this, not especially for cutting, but it's just great, in a pot round the back door. This is Salvia amistad, and ideally when you're taking cuttings, you don't use stems which have flowered, because a lot of the energy has gone into the flowering, and you don't want to use stems to try and root which have spent a lot of energy. Look what I've got down here. I've got some really nice little side shoots, and they're going to make lovely cuttings. I know from experience that if I try and tear these off, I might not get much in the way, because it's quite, they break off really nicely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to snip off just under the join here. Can you see the little black line? That's where the plant has a join. So I'm going to snip off just under there. There. I'm going to snip off just above it. Take off the big side leaf there. And I've got two nice little beginnings of cuttings. So instead of trying to pull them off and risking not getting any stemmy bit, I'm actually going to cut up the stem, which is fairly chunky. And there. I've got a nice bit of stem there. I'm going to cut right back. I just want a little tiny bit of that stem. I want the place where the action is, not enormous amounts. There, can you see? I'm going to pinch out the growing tip. Gone. And I'm also going to, you see, because the thing is I want the plant to be able to photosynthesize, but I don't want big floppy leaves. I don't want it to wilt. So I'm going to cut half these leaves off. So they can still photosynthesize, but there's not so much leaf surface, so it won't be so wilty. And in it goes. Right, I'll do some of those and then I'll get back to you. Onto the lavender, same principle as the rosemary. Pull it off carefully. Tidy up the side leaves. They're tiny. I could have done this earlier in the summer. You don't have to wait until now. If you're watching this in 2024, that is a dinky little lavender cutting. If you're watching this in 24, you can do this. I mean, you can do it any time that the mood suddenly takes you, really. But I would say after midsummer, just because otherwise you get such big plants that it's hard to overwinter them. So I would have done this any time from July. This cutting was taken in July. And these will stay quite small through the winter, but for next year, I will have some rosemary, some lavender, some salvia, and bits and pieces for outside my back door pots. So scented pelargoniums, very easy to do because they grow on very easily bifurcating stems. They're hanging out of the side of a pot for me. And so they grow up. So I get lots of potential cutting material. So there's one here, there's one here, there's one here, it's one or two here. And the principle remains the same. Pull it off. In this case, I've pulled that one off, so it's got a little bit of the old stem. I've taken off the lower leaves, pinch out the growing tip. I'm going to have as little green as I can, but it needs to be able to photosynthesize. So I'm going to snip half, because these are quite big leaves, snip half of them off. That shows up, doesn't it? Pop that in its pot. The other way to do it is if you've got a longer stem, like this one, you might think that that's too long to put into my pot. So what I'm going to do is I'm cutting it off where there was a join. Tear off the bits, tear off the spare bits, pinch out the growing tip. Always important to pinch out the growing tip because then the potential plant will put the energy into sending down roots rather than trying to grow up. But a lot of these, if you're nervous or you want to see the process, I totally get that. I mean, I think we don't necessarily believe what we're seeing. And a lot of these, if you just put them in a vase and leave them for long enough, keep the water fresh, even potentially put a tiny bit of soil in the water, so it sits at the bottom, will root. So you can actually see the roots begin to come. But for me, I'm Speedy Gonzalez. This suits me very nicely. Let's have another. Oh, it's fun doing this. Look at this instant plant, instant garden. Right, on I go. Right, now before we go any further, I just have to talk about this rooting powder. This is from Vitax and it's organic. And it is made with calcified seaweed, ground from the seaweed. I just spoke to Harvey at Vitax and I rang him up and he was brilliant. I said, because that I was contacted by somebody the other day who is a manufacturer of herbicides and pesticides, and they were very keen I should go on their podcast and talk about, you know, where I might use herbicides and pesticides. And as you all know, I'm very keen on, I'm going to move the camera up a bit so I can talk directly. I'm very keen on gardening in such a way that that pests and disease are controlled by the environment, because I'm not a you know, I do a bit of permaculture, I'm a bit of forest gardening, I'm a bit of, I'm certainly not a monoculture. And so the system here generally holds everything together. So I rang him and I've always talked about, by habit, I've always talked about using hormone rooting powder, because that's what I was taught to do by my mother, who some of you may have seen on my channel elsewhere. She's called Googie and she has a very nice garden of her own. And I learned to garden from her. Anyway, so when I use a product like this, in my head, it's called hormone rooting powder. Of course, for an organic product, no more hormones. That's all gone. When I said to this chap, Harvey at Vitax, I'm using your hormone rooting powder, he said, he was very surprised and he said, we stopped selling that 12 years ago. You can't be. And I went, oh, well, this is what I've got. Anyway, so I described it to him and he said, oh yes, that's completely different. So what this is a preparation which when one dips one's little cutting into it and then pops it into the soil, what it is it, and his description was so good, I'm going to give it to you. He said, it very, very, very slowly taken up by the plant, but it's not a food. It is something which makes the soil comfortable for the seedling to grow roots into. So it is, I mean, I could probably go out and put some other things. I could possibly use a tiny little bit of mycorrhiza or a tiny little bit of, blood, fish and bone, or, you know, there are all sorts of things that one can put a tiny little bit of in soil to make the potential cutting more likely to root. I have for years not used anything very successfully. And the only reason I bought this earlier this summer is because, you may remember, we had a cold spring. And so I was taking dahlia cuttings quite late and I really wanted them to get a move on and it worked really nicely. So I was like, oh yeah, okay, maybe there are some gardening tools that I could use rather than just not using anything. Anyway, so Harvey at Vitax said, using this, dipping the tips of the stems of my cuttings into this and then popping them in the compost is a bit like when you boil a ham a couple of times and then there's a load of other stuff, like you might douse it in cider or cloves or sugar or mustard or all sorts of other things, most of which gets poured away, but which improve the ham enormously. And this is what that is for a plant, for a cutting. So I thought that was such a lovely analogy. Thank you very much, Harvey, and everybody. I recommend, this is absolutely not hormone rooting powder. and it works very nicely and I like it. A pot this big, I've got to tell you, is going to last you several years unless you're taking 1 million cuttings. There you go. And that is the end of my little lecture. And the person who emailed me to say that if you're using hormone rooting powder, then you're not as organic as it's classed as a pesticide. Thank goodness I was wrong, and I still don't especially want to talk to them because I think they want me to talk about how things are allowed in certain circumstances. And I think they're probably not. Anyway, moving on. Oh, this thing never turns anything off. So, trays of cuttings. Other people might scatter gravel, perlite, vermiculite, all sorts of things on the surface. I don't, because they seem to, and the point of doing that is to stop the surface drying out during the winter. I find that they get a bit mouldy and a bit green, a bit manky in my damp greenhouse. Goodness, it's windy out there. And I don't, because I water from underneath. The water is still slowly being taken up. You can see drip, drip, drip. Can you see the drips? I can see the drips. You may not be able to see. Look, drip, drip, drip. There we are. So slowly the water is being taken up. I may go round later and just add a little bit more compost to make sure that the compost is up to the top, but that's all done. Now, there's always a load of chat about with cuttings that you can take each pot, and put a clear plastic bag over the top, contain the clear plastic bag so it's sort of not going anywhere, and that will help the cutting take. At this time of year, it's cool, it's not frosty, it's rainy, the sun isn't too high in the sky. I'm actually just going to put these outside in the pouring rain where they'll get rained on, and then as the weather cools further, I will transfer them to my greenhouse. So you know, you can make your processes as complicated as you like. If I were taking these cuttings earlier in the summer and the weather were hotter, no, I wouldn't put a plastic bag. I'm not a plastic bag fan. I'm a fan of keeping things as simple as possible to make things work. And this was taken in July and I've potted it on, and I didn't put a plastic bag, I just put it in the shade. Cuttings don't like too much direct hot sunlight. They don't want to be shocked. But it's cool and grey outside, so these are going outside without any plastic bag, with no lid. If it were sunny and hotter, I would put them in the shade, and that's the closest I would get. But if you wanted to, you could put a lid, or you could individually put a clear plastic bag around each pot and hold it on with an elastic band, and it would look all steamy inside. I don't really like that. I think it looks a bit airless. Anyway, what do I know? Right, these going outside, and then I'll show you a few more bits. Sorry, I think I must make it very clear. These cuttings are not spending the winter outside where I'm putting them now. When the cold weather comes, it's not there yet. When the cold weather comes, I will put them in the greenhouse, in a cool greenhouse, and I will protect them from frost. I won't warm them up. It won't be a hot situation, but I will keep that greenhouse pretty much frost-free. So they can stay outside in this cool, damp weather until, that make another cutting, you see, easily, if you wanted to, like that. You can do, I mean, it's very easy. There you go, another one. But, they will, so they will be protected over the winter, but I'm putting them outside for the moment because it's cool, damp, and perfect for them to quietly just grow. You know, it's not cold No frost yet. Sorry, right, that was the phone. So now this cutting was taken in July and looked very well, and I have recently, and has rooted nicely, and so I repeatedly split a pot of cuttings that was looking like this and potted each one up individually. That one's lost a leaf. And what I've done is I've cut them back a bit because it's going to be the winter and I don't want them to have too much. These are quite tender and I don't want them to have too much leaf which could get frozen. So that's why you can see I've cut these back a little bit. So imagine those pots of cuttings that I've just taken have rooted, and the way that you can tell that they've rooted is by two different ways. You can either look at the bottom and you'll see roots coming out of the bottom of the pot. This has got plenty of weeds growing in it because it's mid-September, so this has been sitting in the shade, kind of in a shady spot, growing on since July, so a couple of months. So pinch out the weeds, and the other way to tell whether it's rooted or not is put your hand on the surface, turn the pot upside down. This can be messy, so I would wait until you're fairly confident you've got a good root system, because the roots, you see them, the root system will hold everything together. Look, lots of roots. So I've got 3 nicely rooted cuttings there. I'm going to split them by pulling them apart. 1, 2, and there's the third one. I'm going to take off a bit of the spare compost, and in doing this I am pulling a bit of the root away, but it doesn't matter. What I'm doing when I pull the roots away, I'm kind of rejuvenating the rooting, so it'll go, oh, I've lost a bit of root, I'll do some more work. So there is my seedling with its roots, and I've filled up my pot. I'm going to make a hole in the middle and just pot it. Now I'm using the same compost. It's this nice Silver Grow compost, and there is one potted on seedling. Now I don't want it to get too big through the winter, so I'm going to snip some of that nice healthy looking leaf material off. And again, I'm leaving enough for it to photosynthesize, but I don't want a great big enormous plant. I'm planting this out next spring, not now. And I'm going to do the rest with the others, and that is the end of the day. You may have noticed that beginning to pile up beside me are other things, because I'm going to make the most of this rainy afternoon and do lots of pricking out and potting on, because I'm hoping that tomorrow will be beautiful sunshine, or at least dry in the morning, because I'm going to cut this wedding. I've got a sweet pea tray because I'm sowing sweet peas, so that I'm going to have some seedlings, or just beginning to germinate seedlings, for my demo next Friday at 5 o'clock British summertime. Should you, oh no. Yes, it's still British summertime next Friday. So you could book a place on that if you like. And there's loads of stuff going on. The club has got 300 members. Yes, exciting times. Anyway, on we go. I hope you've enjoyed the clip, and I will see you very soon. It's a very long clip. I hope you stick with me through the whole thing. Bye. I can never turn this thing off.